The rain hammered against the garage door like angry fists, each drop echoing through the cavernous space where Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez worked beneath the yellow glow of a single hanging bulb. His massive hands, scarred from countless bar fights and motorcycle accidents, moved with surprising delicacy as he adjusted the carburetor on his 1974 Harley Shovelhead. The bike was his pride, a beast of chrome and steel that had carried him through 2 decades of Brotherhood with the Devil's Outcasts MC. A soft whimper from the corner made him pause. There, curled up on a pile of old shop rags, lay the reason his brothers had been giving him hell for the past month. The puppy, though calling it that seemed generous given its pathetic state, was little more than skin stretched over jutting ribs. Its matted fur, once probably golden, now resembled the color of rust and neglect. Tank wiped his greasy hands on his jeans and walked over to the makeshift bed. The mutt's eyes, cloudy and unfocused, tracked his movement with the wariness of something that had learned the hard way that humans meant pain. When Tank reached down, the dog flinched but lacked the strength to flee. "Still breathing, you worthless piece of shit," Tank muttered, though his voice carried no real malice. He'd found the dog 3 weeks ago outside Murphy's Tavern, half dead in a puddle of its own filth, while a group of college kids threw beer bottles at it for entertainment. Tank had sent 2 of them to the hospital and brought the dog home, though he couldn't say why. Maybe it was the way the animal had looked at him. Not pleading, not broken, just tired. Tank understood tired. The garage door rattled as someone pounded on it from outside. Tank glanced at the clock, 2:17 a.m. Nothing good happened at this hour, especially not in his neighborhood. He grabbed the .45 from his workbench and tucked it into his waistband before hitting the button to raise the door. 3 figures stood in the rain, their leather cuts soaked through. Tank recognized Razor and Bones, 2 prospects from the Phoenix chapter, flanking a man he hoped never to see again. Vincent "Viper" Castellano, underboss of the Torino crime family. The Italian's expensive suit was ruined by the weather, but his smile remained as cold as ever. "Tank," Viper said, stepping into the garage uninvited. "You're a hard man to find these days." Not hard enough, apparently. Tank kept his distance, hyper-aware of the weight of his gun. "Club territory, Vincent. You got no business here." "Business?" Viper laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "This is personal, my friend. 4 years personal." The prospects moved to flank Tank, their hands resting casually on concealed weapons. Tank had faced worse odds, but something felt different tonight. Dangerous. From the corner, he heard the puppy's labored breathing, a wet rattle that spoke of lungs filling with fluid. "That thing's dying," Viper observed, following Tank's glance. Merciful thing would be to put it out of its misery. Like what should have happened to Mickey Torino before he started talking to the feds. Tank's jaw tightened. Mickey Torino, Viper's own nephew, had been skimming money from the family's protection racket 4 years ago. When the heat came down, Mickey tried to cut a deal with the FBI, naming Tank as his connection to the Devil's Outcasts drug pipeline. Tank had found Mickey first, and the conversation they'd had in a warehouse in Queens had ended with Mickey deciding he preferred breathing to testifying. "Mickey made his choice," Tank said. "Ancient history. History has a way of repeating itself." Viper pulled a cigarette from his jacket, taking his time lighting it despite the rain still blowing through the open door. "See, Mickey's mama, my dear sister, she's been asking questions lately, wondering what really happened to her boy. Family pressure, you understand." Tank understood perfectly. Blood was blood, even when that blood belonged to a rat bastard who would have destroyed them all. "So, what's this? Revenge?" Tank shifted his weight, ready to move. "You could have sent anyone. Why come yourself?" "Professional courtesy," Viper replied. "We had good business together once, before Mickey fucked it all up." He took a long drag from his cigarette, studying Tank through the smoke. I'm giving you a choice, Tank. Walk away from the club, disappear, and this ends here. Or the unspoken threat hung in the air like the cigarette smoke. Tank glanced again at the dying puppy, then back at the 3 men who'd come to kill him. Funny how life worked. He'd saved one worthless life only to lose his own a month later. And if I refuse? Viper's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Then we finish what Mickey started 4 years ago. In the corner, the puppy struggled to lift its head, those cloudy eyes fixed on Tank with something that might have been recognition. Or maybe trust. Tank made his choice. The morning sun cast long shadows across the compound as Jake loaded his saddlebags with the last of his gear. The rumble of Harleys filled the air, 6 bikes total, each rider checking their weapons one final time before the run to Phoenix. Tank had outlined the job the night before: intercept a rival crew's drug shipment and send a message that the Devil's disciples weren't welcome in their territory. Diesel sat at attention beside Jake's bike, those intelligent brown eyes tracking every movement. The dog had grown into a formidable 70-pound presence, his mixed-breed genetics creating a lean but muscular frame that commanded respect. His coat had darkened to a rich brown with black markings around his muzzle and ears, giving him an almost wolf-like appearance that made strangers think twice about approaching. "Not this time, boy," Jake said, scratching behind Diesel's ears. "This ain't a pleasure ride." But Diesel had other ideas. As Jake swung his leg over the softail and kicked the engine to life, the dog positioned himself directly in front of the bike's front wheel, refusing to budge despite the rumbling machine inches from his face. "Move it, Diesel!" Jake shouted over the engine noise. The dog's response was to sit down, tail wagging but body language clearly stating his intention to stay put. Tank pulled up alongside, his own bike growling with barely contained power. "Problem, Reaper?" Jake looked down at his 4-legged companion, noting the determined set of the dog's shoulders. In 4 years, Diesel had never acted like this before a ride. Something felt different today, an electricity in the air that made the hair on Jake's arms stand up. "He's being stubborn," Jake called back, but even as he said it, unease crept up his spine. Diesel's instincts had never been wrong before. Snake revved his engine impatiently. "Leave the mutt! We're burning daylight." Jake studied Diesel's face, seeing something he'd learned to recognize over the years. A warning. The dog's ears were slightly back, his breathing shallow and quick. It was the same posture he'd taken the night before the FBI raid on their meth lab 2 years ago, when he'd refused to let Jake enter the building. They'd discovered the surveillance equipment the next day. 5 minutes, Jake announced, killing his engine. "Something's off." Tank's expression darkened. "Christ, Reaper, we're not changing plans because your dog's got separation anxiety." But Jake was already off his bike, following Diesel as the dog trotted toward the compound's main building. The rest of the crew exchanged glances, engines still running, but Jake had earned enough respect over the years that they waited. Inside the clubhouse, Diesel went straight to the back office where they kept their communications equipment. He pawed at the radio setup, whining softly. Jake flipped on the scanner, cycling through police frequencies until he found what made his blood run cold. Roadblock established at mile marker 47 on Route 10 eastbound. All units in position for Operation Chokehold. "Son of a bitch," Jake muttered, grabbing the 2-way radio. "Tank, get in here, now." The president's heavy boots thundered across the wooden floor. When he heard the scanner traffic, his face went granite hard. The police were setting up interdiction points along their entire planned route. Someone had leaked their operation. How the hell did they know? Tank's voice was barely controlled fury. Jake's mind raced through possibilities. Only the inner circle knew about today's run. The 6 riders going out, plus 2 prospects who'd helped with planning. But as he watched Diesel sniff around the office, still agitated, another thought occurred to him. When's the last time anyone swept this place for bugs? Tank's eyes widened. They'd been so focused on securing their digital communications that they'd gotten sloppy about physical surveillance. While Tank called off the run over the radio, Jake followed Diesel's nose to a loose baseboard behind the filing cabinet. His knife blade pried up the wood to reveal a small electronic device. Red light blinking steadily. Federal listening device, Jake confirmed, holding up the bug. Professional grade. The room went dead quiet, except for the distant rumble of bikes outside. Someone had been inside their clubhouse. Someone with serious resources and technical capability. The Phoenix run would have been a massacre. 6 of their best riders riding straight into a federal task force operation. Tank crushed the device under his boot, his face murderous. Whoever planted this is a dead man walking. Jake looked down at Diesel, who had finally relaxed now that the threat was acknowledged. The dog's tail wagged once, as if to say, "Job well done," before he trotted back outside toward the bikes. "That dog just saved all our asses," Tank said quietly. Jake nodded, a chill running down his spine as he realized how close they'd come to disaster. But more troubling was the bigger question. Who had betrayed them, and how deep did this go? As he followed Tank outside to brief the crew, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much worse. The morning sun cast long shadows across the garage floor as Jake tightened the last bolt on his Harley's engine. Diesel lay sprawled nearby, one eye cracked open to monitor every movement his human made. The dog had grown from that skeletal puppy into 70 pounds of muscle and unwavering devotion. His coat now a lustrous black and tan that caught the light streaming through the garage's grimy windows. "You're getting lazy, boy," Jake muttered, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. Diesel's tail thumped once against the concrete, the only acknowledgement needed between them. The rumble of approaching motorcycles made both their heads turn. Jake recognized the sound immediately. Tommy's bike ran rich, and Snake's exhaust had that distinctive rattle from the crack in his muffler. But there was a third engine, one he didn't recognize. Diesel was already on his feet, positioning himself between Jake and the garage entrance, his ears forward and alert. 3 bikes pulled into the lot. Tommy and Snake killed their engines, but the stranger kept his running. Never a good sign in Jake's experience. The man was younger than the others, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of eager hunger in his eyes that spelled trouble. His cut was new, the leather still stiff, the patches too clean. "Jake," Tommy nodded, but his usual easy smile was nowhere to be found. "We need to talk." Snake dismounted but stayed close to his bike. His hand rested casually near the knife he always kept clipped to his belt. Jake had seen that stance before, back when they'd had to deal with the rival club trying to muscle in on their territory. It was the posture of a man ready for violence but hoping to avoid it. "Who's your friend?" Jake asked, nodding toward the stranger who finally shut off his engine. "Danny Morrison," the young man said, stepping forward with more confidence than wisdom. "Heard a lot about you." Jake's eyes flicked to Tommy, reading the tension in his old friend's shoulders. "That so? Hope it was all good." Danny's laugh had an edge to it. "Depends on your definition of good. Heard you've been going soft, living quiet, playing house with your mutt there." Diesel's lip curled slightly, a barely audible growl rumbling in his chest. The dog understood tone better than most humans understood words. "Easy, boy," Jake said quietly, but his attention never left Danny. "Tommy, you want to tell me what this is really about?" Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "Club's changing, Jake. New leadership's got new ideas about how things should run, about who belongs and who doesn't." The pieces clicked into place with uncomfortable clarity. Jake had been expecting this conversation for months, ever since Iron Mike had been arrested and the power structure had shifted. New blood meant new rules, and Jake's semi-retirement had made him a target for ambitious young members looking to prove themselves. "And let me guess," Jake said, "Danny here thinks I don't belong anymore." "Nothing personal," Danny said, though his grin suggested otherwise. Just business. Club needs members who are all in, not guys who've gone domestic. Snake finally spoke up, his voice gravelly from too many cigarettes and too many fights. Kids got backing from the new council. They want you out, Jake. Question is whether you leave peaceful or we make it messy. Jake studied the three men arrayed before him. Tommy, his friend for over a decade, couldn't meet his eyes. Snake looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Danny stood with the cocky posture of someone who'd never been in a real fight but thought his club colors made him invincible. And if I don't feel like leaving? Jake asked. Danny's hand moved toward his jacket, but he never got the chance to reach whatever weapon he carried there. Diesel exploded into motion, covering the distance between them in 3 bounds. The dog's full weight slammed into Danny's chest, driving him backward into his motorcycle. Both man and machine crashed to the ground in a tangle of metal and panic. Jesus Christ! Danny scrambled backward, his earlier bravado evaporating as Diesel stood over him, lips pulled back to reveal teeth that could crush bone. Diesel, stay! Jake commanded, and the dog froze instantly, though he maintained his position over the fallen man. Now, Danny, you were saying something about making things messy? Tommy stepped forward, hands raised peacefully. Jake, this doesn't have to escalate. The council's decision is final, but they're offering compensation. Enough to start fresh somewhere else. Compensation for what? For bleeding for this club? For taking a bullet in Phoenix when we had that territory war with the Scorpions? Jake's voice remained level, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Or maybe compensation for keeping my mouth shut about things I've seen over the years. The threat hung in the air like smoke from burning oil. Everyone present knew Jake had been involved in the club's darker business for years. His silence was worth more than money. Danny struggled to his feet, giving Diesel a wide berth. This isn't over. Yeah, Jake said, watching as the 3 men prepared to leave. I figured as much. The warehouse district looked different in daylight, all concrete and rust bleeding down corrugated metal walls. Marcus pulled his Harley behind a dumpster 3 blocks from the meeting spot, the engine's rumble echoing off empty buildings before dying to silence. Tank jumped down from his custom seat, immediately alert, ears swiveling at every distant sound. Easy, boy, Marcus murmured, checking his. 45 one more time before sliding it back into his jacket. Just a conversation. But they both knew better. Tank's hackles were already rising, that 6th sense that had kept them alive more times than Marcus could count. The dog pressed against his leg, a solid wall of muscle and loyalty. They walked the remaining blocks on foot, Marcus's boots echoing hollow on cracked pavement. The meeting place was neutral ground, an abandoned auto shop that had been shuttered since the recession hit. Supposedly neutral, anyway. In their world, neutrality was just another word for the calm before the storm. The Serpents were already there when Marcus arrived. 3 bikes parked outside, chrome gleaming despite the overcast sky. He recognized the rides. Carlos Viper Mendez's custom chopper with the snake wrapped around the gas tank, and 2 others belonging to his lieutenants. Marcus had done business with the Serpents before, small-time stuff mostly, gun running, the occasional drug transport. But this felt different. Tank growled low in his chest as they approached the entrance, a sound that vibrated through the soles of Marcus's boots. The dog's instincts were never wrong. Inside, the auto shop still smelled of motor oil and old rubber. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, casting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Viper stood near an old hydraulic lift flanked by his men. Late 30s, lean as a whip, with prison tattoos climbing his neck like vines. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Tank!" Viper called out, like they were old friends. And his faithful dog. The insult hung in the air like gun smoke. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but Tank's growl deepened. One of Viper's men, a thick-set enforcer called Bulldog, laughed and spat into the dust. Heard you got yourself in some trouble with the Angels, Viper continued, circling slowly. Leadership ain't too happy with some of your recent entrepreneurial activities. Marcus said nothing. Let them talk. Information was currency, and he wasn't about to spend what he had freely. See, that creates opportunities for people like me, Viper went on. A man of your particular skills, suddenly finding himself without the protection of that precious patch. He gestured at the Hells Angels colors on Marcus's jacket. Makes him vulnerable. Makes him available. I'm listening, Marcus said finally. Smart man. I got a job needs doing. Big money, bigger risks. The kind of thing the Angels would never sanction, but a freelancer might find attractive. Viper stopped pacing, fixing Marcus with predator eyes. There's a shipment coming through the port next week. Pharmaceuticals. The legal kind, but worth more on the street than most illegal stuff. Security's light, because nobody expects anyone to be stupid enough to hit a medical transport. Tank shifted beside Marcus, and he felt the subtle change in the dog's posture. Not looking at Viper anymore, but toward the back of the building, toward shadows that might not be empty. What's my cut? Marcus asked, buying time, processing what Tank was telling him. 30%. More money than you've seen in years. 50. Viper's smile widened. I like a man who knows his worth. 40. And we got a deal. Marcus nodded slowly, but his hand was already drifting toward his jacket. Tank's ears were flat against his skull now, every muscle coiled like a spring. The setup was closing around them like a noose. Just one thing, Viper said, and his voice had gone cold. My employers were very specific about the terms. They want to make sure you're properly motivated. Can't have you running back to your old brothers with tales to tell. The first shot came from the shadows near the back wall, right where Tank had been watching. Marcus was already moving, the dog's warning having bought him the split second that meant the difference between life and death. The bullet sparked off the concrete where his head had been. Tank launched himself at Bulldog as the enforcer went for his gun, 90 pounds of fury and fangs taking the man down in a crash of limbs and screaming. Marcus rolled behind the hydraulic lift, drawing his. 45 as automatic fire chewed up the space around him. Viper was shouting orders, but his voice was drowned out by gunfire and Tank's savage snarling. Marcus counted muzzle flashes, at least 5 shooters, maybe 6, more than Viper had brought in openly, which meant this had been planned from the start. The job had been bait. The whole thing was an execution dressed up as a business meeting. But they'd made one critical mistake in their planning. They'd accounted for Marcus, but they'd forgotten about Tank. And that oversight was going to cost them everything. The warehouse smelled of rust and motor oil, familiar scents that should have been comforting, but instead made Jake's skin crawl. He'd been here before, back when the Angels still controlled this slice of territory. Now it belonged to the Serpents, and walking through those rusted doors felt like stepping into a tomb. Diesel pressed against his leg, a warm weight that kept him grounded. The dog's ears were alert, swiveling at every sound echoing through the cavernous space. Jake trusted those ears more than his own eyes in the dim light filtering through grimy windows. "You came alone!" Marcus called out from somewhere in the shadows between towering stacks of shipping containers. "Smart! I keep my word," Jake replied, his voice carrying across the empty space. "Question is, do you?" A low chuckle bounced off the concrete walls. "That depends entirely on what you brought me." Jake reached slowly into his leather jacket, making sure his movements were visible. The USB drive felt insignificant between his fingers, barely larger than his thumb, but it contained enough encrypted data to topple 3 different criminal enterprises. Financial records, shipping manifests, federal informant lists, the kind of information that men killed for without hesitation. "Everything's here," Jake said, holding up the drive. 4 years of Reaper's private files, bank accounts, safe houses, the works. Marcus emerged from behind a container, flanked by two serpents Jake didn't recognize. Young faces, hungry eyes, the kind of men who'd pull a trigger just to prove they belonged. Marcus himself looked older than Jake remembered, grey streaking his beard, but his eyes held the same cold calculation that had made him dangerous 20 years ago. "Toss it over," Marcus ordered. "Not until I see proof Tommy's alive." Marcus nodded to one of his men, who disappeared behind another stack of containers. The silence stretched taut as a wire, broken only by the distant rumble of traffic and Diesel's steady breathing. Jake kept his hand near his waistband, though he knew the Colt wouldn't do much good if things went sideways. 3 against 1 in their territory, with limited exits. The math wasn't in his favor. The serpent returned, dragging a figure Jake barely recognized. Tommy's face was a map of bruises, one eye swollen shut, his prospect patch torn and bloodied. But he was breathing, and when he looked up and saw Jake, something like hope flickered in his good eye. "There's your proof," Marcus said. "Now, let's see that drive." Jake tossed it underhand, watching as Marcus caught it, and immediately handed it off to be examined. The seconds crawled by while one of the serpents plugged it into a tablet, scrolling through directories and encrypted files. "Looks legit," the man reported. "Real deal." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know, Jake, I always respected you. Even when you were running with Reaper's crew, you had a code. Honor among thieves and all that." "We had a deal," Jake said carefully. Something in Marcus's tone was setting off alarm bells. "We did, and I'm a man of my word too." Marcus pulled A45 from his jacket. "The boy walks free. But you've seen too much, know too much. Can't have loose ends wandering around." Jake's hand moved toward his gun, but froze when he heard the distinctive sound of multiple hammers being pulled back. More serpents had emerged from hiding spots throughout the warehouse, at least 6 that he could see, all with weapons trained on him. "Easy now," Marcus said. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Diesel growled low in his throat, a sound like distant thunder. The dog had moved slightly forward, positioning himself between Jake and the nearest serpent. Jake could feel the tension coiling in the animal's muscles, could see his hackles rising. "Let the dog go," Jake said quietly. "He's got no part in this." "That mutt's been nothing but trouble since day one," Marcus replied. "Should have put him down years ago when he bit Crazy Eddie." The barrel of the 45 swung toward Diesel, and Jake's world narrowed to a pinpoint of crystalline clarity. Time seemed to slow as Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. In that frozen moment, Jake saw everything with perfect precision: the angle of the gun, the distance between them, the way Diesel's body was coiled to spring. The warehouse erupted in chaos as Jake dove sideways, shouting Diesel's name. The sharp crack of gunfire echoed off the concrete walls, followed immediately by snarling and screaming. Jake hit the ground hard, rolling behind a concrete pillar as bullets chewed chunks from the wall where he'd been standing. Through the din of shouting and gunfire, he heard Marcus cursing, heard someone screaming about their arm. Diesel had moved faster than any of them expected, 60 pounds of loyal muscle and teeth finding their target with surgical precision. Jake drew his Colt and tried to process the battlefield, looking for an opening, a way out that didn't end with both of them dead on the warehouse floor. The warehouse smelled like rust and betrayal. Marcus could taste both in the back of his throat as he stepped through the corrugated metal doorway, Diesel padding silently beside him. The dog's hackles weren't raised, but Marcus noticed the subtle tension in his companion's shoulders. The same wariness that had kept them both alive these past 4 years. "You're early," came a gravelly voice from the shadows. Tommy Crowbar Benedetto emerged from behind a stack of shipping containers, his leather cut pristine despite the grime surrounding them. Behind him, 3 other figures materialized like smoke given form. Marcus kept his hands visible but relaxed. Traffic was light. "Yeah, I bet." Tommy's eyes flicked down to Diesel, who sat perfectly still but alert. "Brought your shadow, I see." "He goes where I go." Marcus's voice carried no room for negotiation. "You said you had information about who's been hitting our supply runs." Tommy nodded, pulling a cigarette from his vest pocket. The flame from his lighter cast dancing shadows across his weathered face. "That I do. Question is, you sure you want to hear it?" Something cold settled in Marcus's gut. In the periphery of his vision, he caught Diesel's ears twitch forward, a sign the dog had picked up something Marcus's human senses had missed. Years of riding together, sleeping in the same cramped motel rooms, and watching each other's backs had created an almost telepathic bond between them. "Spit it out, Tommy." "It's Rico." The name hung in the air like a death sentence. "Your boy Rico's been feeding information to the serpents. Routes, timing, cargo manifests, everything." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. Rico had been his road brother for 8 years, since before Diesel had stumbled into his life as a half-dead pile of matted fur. They'd bled together, fought together, built the Angels drug distribution network together. "You're lying." Tommy shrugged. "Figured you'd say that. Which is why I brought proof." He gestured to one of his companions, who stepped forward with a manila envelope. Photos, recorded phone calls, bank records showing deposits that don't match his cut from legitimate club business. Marcus took the envelope but didn't open it. "Not yet." "Why bring this to me? Why not take it straight to Bones?" "Because Rico's already talking to the feds." Tommy's words hit like a sledgehammer. "And your name's at the top of his list." The warehouse suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. Marcus's mind raced through the implications while his body remained statue still. Beside him, Diesel's breathing had changed, shorter, more alert. The dog sensed the shift in atmosphere, the way danger had crystallized from mere possibility into imminent threat. When? Tonight. Maybe tomorrow morning. "My source says there's already a warrant drawn up, just waiting for Rico's final statement." Marcus finally opened the envelope, scanning the contents by the dim light filtering through grimy windows. Photos of Rico meeting with men in suits. Transcripts of conversations where his own criminal activities were laid out in damning detail. Bank statements showing Rico's sudden financial windfall. "What do you want, Tommy?" "Smart question." Tommy took a long drag from his cigarette. "Rico's not just burning you. He's burning roots that affect my territory too. I want him gone, but it needs to look like club justice, not a territorial hit. You handle Rico, and I'll make sure certain evidence never reaches the right ears." "Evidence about what?" Tommy smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "About who really ordered the hit on Detective Morrison last spring." Another blow. Marcus had suspected that particular job would come back to haunt someone eventually, but he'd thought the trail was cold. Apparently, trails never really went cold. They just waited underground like sleeping snakes. Diesel suddenly stood, his body language shifting to full alert. A heartbeat later, Marcus heard what the dog had detected. The distant rumble of motorcycle engines approaching, multiple bikes moving fast. "Expecting company?" Marcus asked, his hand drifting toward the .45 holstered under his arm. Tommy's face had gone pale. "That's not—" His words were cut off by the sharp crack of the warehouse's rear entrance being kicked open. Federal agents, everyone on the ground. The warehouse exploded into chaos. Tommy's men scattered like roaches when the lights came on, but there was nowhere to run. Flashlight beams cut through the gloom as boots pounded on concrete. Marcus heard Diesel's low growl, felt the dog's body coiled like a spring beside him. In that moment of crystalline clarity that comes just before violence erupts, Marcus understood. This wasn't a coincidence. The meeting, the timing, the convenient arrival of federal agents, it all fit together with the precision of a well-oiled trap. Rico hadn't just betrayed him to save his own skin. He'd orchestrated this entire scenario, using Tommy as bait to lure Marcus into the open. The evidence in the envelope was probably real, but the meeting was a setup from the beginning. Marcus looked down at Diesel, seeing his own grim realization reflected in the dog's intelligent eyes. They were fucked. The warehouse smelled like rust and old motor oil, a scent that should have been comforting but instead made Jake's skin crawl. He'd been holed up here for 3 days now, ever since Bones had died in his arms outside the clubhouse. Rex hadn't left his side, those amber eyes constantly scanning the shadows, ears pricked for any sound that didn't belong. Jake's phone buzzed against his chest. Another text from an unknown number. "We know where you are." He deleted it without reading the rest and tossed the burner phone into a corner. It clattered against the concrete, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. Rex's head snapped toward the noise, a low rumble building in his throat. "Easy, boy," Jake whispered, running his fingers through the dog's thick fur. "Just being paranoid." But Rex wasn't convinced. The dog had been on edge since they'd arrived, refusing to settle, constantly positioning himself between Jake and the various entrances. 4 years of life on the road had sharpened Rex's instincts to a razor's edge, and right now those instincts were screaming danger. Jake pulled out his laptop and opened the encrypted files he'd managed to salvage from Bones' computer before the club had been raided. Names, dates, transactions. Enough evidence to bring down half the Russian mob in the city. No wonder they wanted him dead. What he couldn't figure out was how they'd found the clubhouse so fast, or why Bones had been carrying this information in the first place. The sound of tires on gravel outside made both man and dog freeze. Rex's ears flattened against his skull, and Jake felt his heart hammering against his ribs. He closed the laptop and slipped it into his jacket, then moved to the grimy window that faced the access road. 3 black SUVs were pulling up to the warehouse. Jake counted at least 8 men emerging from the vehicles, all wearing dark suits that looked out of place in the industrial wasteland. Their movements were coordinated, professional, military or former military, Jake guessed. The kind of men who wouldn't hesitate to put a bullet in a mangy biker and his dog. "Shit," Jake breathed. He grabbed his .45 from the workbench and checked the clip. 15 rounds. Not nearly enough if this turned into a firefight. Rex was already at his side, muscles coiled like springs, waiting for Jake's command. The dog's loyalty had never wavered, not through bar fights, police chases, or the long nights when Jake had been too drunk to remember his own name. Now that loyalty might get them both killed. The warehouse had 3 exits. The main loading dock where the SUVs were positioned, a side door that led to an alley, and a fire escape that climbed to the roof. The side door was Jake's best bet, but it meant crossing 30 yards of open floor space. If the Russians had surrounded the building, he'd be walking into a trap. Heavy footsteps echoed from the loading dock. Jake heard the screech of metal as someone pried open the rolling door. A flashlight beam swept across the far wall, and voices spoke in rapid Russian. They were being methodical, professional. These weren't street thugs looking to make a quick score. These were killers who took pride in their work. Jake made his decision. He pointed toward the side door and whispered a single word to Rex. "Scout." The dog melted into the shadows, moving with the fluid grace of his wolf ancestors. Jake had trained him for situations like this, though he'd hoped they'd never need to use those skills. Rex would check the exit, determine if it was clear, and return with intelligence that might save both their lives. While Rex was gone, Jake grabbed the emergency pack he'd stashed near the workbench. Cash, fake IDs, ammunition, and a first aid kit. Everything he needed to disappear, assuming he lived long enough to use it. The laptop with Bones' files was his insurance policy, but it was also what had painted the target on his back. A soft whine from the direction of the side door told Jake what he needed to know. Rex had found something. Jake crept through the maze of abandoned machinery, his boots silent on the concrete floor. Rex was crouched beside a stack of oil drums, his attention focused on the door. When Jake reached him, the dog looked up with an expression that was almost human in its intelligence. Two men outside. Rex held up his paw twice, a signal they'd practiced countless times. The dog had seen two hostiles covering the exit. The flashlight beams were getting closer now, and Jake could hear the Russians communicating through radio headsets. They were tightening the noose, and soon there would be nowhere left to run. He looked down at Rex, seeing his own grim determination reflected in the dog's eyes. "Looks like we're going to have to fight our way out, boy," Jake whispered. Rex's tail gave a single sharp wag. The dog was ready for war. The warehouse stood like a monument to decay on the outskirts of the industrial district, its broken windows catching fragments of the setting sun. Marcus pulled his Harley behind a stack of rusted shipping containers, the engine's rumble echoing off concrete walls before dying into silence. Diesel whined softly from his position strapped to Marcus's chest in the makeshift carrier, sensing the tension radiating from his human. "Easy, boy," Marcus whispered, scratching behind the dog's ears. "We're gonna get Jake out of this mess." 3 days had passed since Jake disappeared, and the cryptic phone call from Vince had led him here. The message was simple: come alone, bring the dog, or Jake dies. Marcus knew it was a trap, but family meant everything in the Angels, and Jake was more than a brother. He was the kid Marcus had pulled from the gutter 5 years ago, clean and sober now, thanks to the Brotherhood. The warehouse's main entrance hung open like a broken jaw. Marcus approached cautiously, his hand instinctively checking the Glock tucked beneath his leather jacket. Diesel's ears were perked forward, alert but calm. The dog had developed an uncanny ability to read situations, and his steady breathing helped settle Marcus's nerves. Inside, the cavernous space was divided by towering shelves filled with abandoned machinery and automotive parts. Shafts of dying sunlight cut through the gloom, creating a maze of shadows and golden pools. Marcus moved deeper into the warehouse, his boots echoing despite his attempts at stealth. "Marcus fucking King!" a voice called from somewhere in the darkness. Vince stepped into view 50 feet away, flanked by 2 men Marcus didn't recognize. Prison tattoos covered their arms, and both carried sawed-off shotguns with the casual ease of experienced killers. "Right on time." "Where's Jake?" Marcus demanded, his voice carrying across the empty space. Vince smiled, revealing teeth yellowed by years of methamphetamine abuse. "Safe. For now. You know, I always respected you, Marcus. But business is business, and you cost me a lot of money when you burned my operation. That was justice, not business. You were pushing poison to kids." "Semantics." Vince shrugged. "The thing is, word on the street says you and that mutt of yours are pretty tight. Makes a man wonder just how far you'd go to protect each other." Diesel growled low in his throat, picking up on the menace in Vince's tone. Marcus felt the dog's muscles tense against his chest, ready to spring into action despite being barely 4 pounds of fury and loyalty. "Let Jake go, and we'll settle this between us," Marcus said. "Oh, we will. But first, I want to see if the stories are true. They say that dog would die for you. Let's find out." Vince nodded to his men, who raised their weapons. The first shotgun blast came without warning, pellets sparking off the concrete near Marcus's feet. He dove behind a support pillar, protecting Diesel as debris rained down around them. The second shot followed immediately, chunks of concrete exploding from the pillar's edge. "You can end this any time, Marcus," Vince called. "Just toss me the dog." Marcus drew his Glock and returned fire, forcing the gunman to take cover behind a forklift. His mind raced, calculating angles and distances. The warehouse's layout offered limited protection, and he was outnumbered and outgunned. But Vince had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated what Marcus would do to protect his family, both human and canine. "Diesel," Marcus whispered, unstrapping the carrier. "Remember what we practiced." The little dog looked up at him with intelligent brown eyes, tail wagging once in acknowledgement. Marcus had spent months training Diesel for situations like this, hoping he'd never need to use those skills. He pointed toward a gap between two machinery crates that led to the warehouse's rear section. "Go find Jake. Quiet, now." Diesel disappeared into the shadows like a ghost, his small size allowing him to navigate spaces no human could follow. Marcus continued firing, drawing attention away from the dog's movement. He could hear Vince cursing and shouting orders to his men who were trying to flank Marcus's position. A distant bark echoed from somewhere deep in the warehouse. Diesel had found something. Marcus broke cover, sprinting toward the sound while laying down suppressing fire. A shotgun blast caught the edge of his jacket, spinning him around, but he kept moving. In the warehouse's far corner, he found Jake bound to a chair, conscious but bloodied. Diesel sat at his feet, having somehow chewed through part of the rope binding Jake's hands. The dog's tail wagged furiously at Marcus's arrival. "About time," Jake croaked, working his hands free. "Though I gotta say, your backup plan needs work." Marcus cut the remaining ropes with his pocket knife. "Can you move? Well enough to get out of here?" Jake stood shakily, accepting the spare pistol Marcus offered. Footsteps echoed through the warehouse as Vince and his men closed in. Marcus looked down at Diesel, who sat alert and ready, and felt a surge of fierce pride. The little dog had already saved them once tonight. Now came the hard part. The warehouse smelled like rust and broken dreams. Marcus kept his back pressed against the concrete wall, feeling the cold seep through his leather jacket, while Diesel's warm body trembled against his leg. The dog's ears were pinned back, golden eyes darting between the shadows where footsteps echoed in the cavernous space. "I know you're in here, Reeves." Vincent's voice carried across the empty floor, smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "Your bike's outside. That piece of shit Harley's hard to miss." Marcus tightened his grip on the .45, mentally counting the rounds he had left. 3 bullets, maybe 4 if he was lucky. Not nearly enough for what was coming. He'd walked straight into this trap like a goddamn amateur, and now both he and Diesel were going to pay for his stupidity. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by at least 2 other sets of boots. Marcus had hoped Vincent would come alone, but the Torino family didn't operate that way. They traveled in packs, like wolves hunting wounded prey. Diesel's nose twitched, and he looked up at Marcus with those intelligent eyes that had seen too much violence in their 4 years together. The dog understood danger better than most humans, Marcus knew. Right now, every instinct in that furry body was screaming to run. "Should have stayed home tonight, boy," Marcus whispered, running his free hand along Diesel's scarred head. The dog had followed him out of the clubhouse despite Marcus's attempts to lock him inside. Somehow, the mutt always knew when trouble was brewing. "You killed my nephew, Marcus." Vincent's voice was closer now, maybe 30 feet away. "Tommy was just a kid, 19 years old." Marcus closed his eyes, remembering the warehouse shootout 3 days ago. Tommy Torino had been pointing a sawed-off shotgun at Marcus's chest when Diesel came flying out of nowhere, 40 pounds of muscle and fury knocking the kid backward into a stack of crates. The gun had gone off, the blast catching Tommy in the chest instead of Marcus. "Kid shouldn't have been there," Marcus called out, shifting position along the wall. "This was between you and the angels. Everything's between me and the angels now." Vincent's laugh echoed off the metal rafters. "Starting with you." A shadow moved across the far end of the warehouse, then another. They were spreading out, trying to box him in. Marcus counted at least 3 different positions, maybe more. The math wasn't good. Diesel suddenly stiffened, his hackles rising as he stared into the darkness ahead of them. Marcus followed the dog's gaze and saw nothing, but he'd learned to trust those keen senses. Something was moving in the blackness between the storage containers. The first shot came from the left, sparking off the concrete inches from Marcus's head. He rolled right, pulling Diesel with him as two more shots punched holes in the wall where they'd been standing. The muzzle flashes lit up the warehouse like deadly fireworks. Marcus squeezed off a return shot, aiming for the flash. Someone cursed in the darkness, but the footsteps kept coming. 2 bullets left, maybe 3. He was running out of options fast. "Give it up, Reeves." Vincent sounded almost reasonable now, like he was discussing the weather. "Walk out with your hands up, and I'll make it quick. Keep playing games, and I'll let my boys get creative." Diesel pressed closer to Marcus's side, his whole body coiled like a spring. The dog's eyes never left the shadows ahead, and Marcus realized his 4-legged partner was tracking something he couldn't see. In all their years together, Diesel had never led him wrong. "What is it, boy?" Marcus whispered. The dog's ears twitched toward a gap between 2 shipping containers about 20 feet away. Marcus strained his eyes and caught the faintest glimmer of reflected light. Metal. Probably a gun barrel. Another shot rang out from the right side, and Marcus felt the wind from the bullet as it passed his ear. They were getting bolder, closing the distance. In another minute or two, they'd have him pinned down with nowhere to run. That's when Diesel made his decision. The dog exploded from Marcus's side like a cannonball, racing straight toward the gap between the containers. Marcus heard Vincent shout something, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Diesel yelped once, but kept running, disappearing into the shadows. "Diesel!" Marcus broke cover without thinking, charging after his dog. More shots erupted around him, but all he could see was that gap where Diesel had vanished. The same gap where someone had been waiting in ambush. He reached the containers just as a man in an expensive suit stumbled backward, clutching his throat. Blood seeped between his fingers, and his gun lay forgotten on the concrete floor. Diesel stood over him, teeth bared, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The ambush had become a rescue. The warehouse smelled like rust and betrayal. Marcus crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, his hand resting on Diesel's neck as they listened to footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. 3 sets, maybe 4. The dog's muscles were coiled tight, ready to spring, but he remained perfectly still at Marcus's silent command. "I know you're in here, Reaper." Tommy's voice bounced off the corrugated walls. "Might as well come out and face this like a man." Marcus pressed his back against the cold metal, calculating distances and angles. The Glock felt heavy in his other hand, 13 rounds left. Not great odds against Tommy's crew, especially with the exit routes they'd likely covered. But he'd been in worse spots before. The difference was, this time he had more than just himself to worry about. Diesel's ears twitched, picking up movement Marcus couldn't hear yet. The dog's nose pointed toward the eastern wall, where a service ladder led to a network of catwalks. Smart. Tommy was positioning someone above for a better angle. "You really thought you could steal from us and just ride off into the sunset?" Tommy continued his monologue, voice moving closer. 400 grand, Marcus. That's not pocket change, even for the angels." The irony would have been funny if bullets weren't about to start flying. Marcus hadn't stolen anything. He'd been set up, framed by someone inside the club who wanted him gone. But proving innocence required staying alive long enough to find evidence, and right now, that seemed like a long shot. A boot scraped against concrete, maybe 30 feet away. Diesel's body tensed further, a low rumble building in his chest that only Marcus could feel through his fingertips. The dog understood the gravity of their situation with an intelligence that never ceased to amaze him. "Easy, boy," Marcus whispered, barely audible. The plan forming in his head was desperate, but desperation had kept him breathing through 2 tours in Afghanistan and a decade with the Angels. He studied the layout they'd scouted earlier, loading dock to the south, office complex to the west, that service ladder Diesel had identified to the east. If he could create enough chaos, maybe they could reach the loading dock. "Last chance, Reaper," Tommy called out. "Return what you took, and maybe we'll make this quick." Marcus closed his eyes, centering himself the way his old drill sergeant had taught him. When he opened them, the world had shifted into that crystal-clear focus that came before violence. Every shadow, every sound, every tactical advantage crystallized in his mind. He touched Diesel's head twice, their signal for controlled aggression. The dog's tail gave the slightest wag, acknowledgement received and understood. "You want me, Tommy?" Marcus shouted back, rising from cover. "Come and get me!" The warehouse erupted. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly lightning as Marcus rolled left, putting the shipping container between himself and the gunfire. Diesel shot forward like a guided missile, his target the man trying to flank them from behind a forklift. The scream that followed was primal and terrified. 80 pounds of loyal fury had found its mark. Marcus popped up, squeezed off 3 quick shots toward the muzzle flashes, then moved again. Combat was about momentum and unpredictability. Stay in one place too long, and you became a statistic. "Jesus Christ!" someone yelled. "Get that damn dog off me!" A shotgun boomed, but the angle was wrong. Whoever fired was panicked, shooting at shadows. Marcus used the confusion to advance toward the loading dock, clearing corners with practiced efficiency. Diesel materialized beside him, moving like smoke between the obstacles. There was no blood on the dog's muzzle, which meant he'd followed training. Attack to disable, not to kill. Though from the continued cursing and moaning, whoever he'd hit wouldn't be rejoining the fight anytime soon. "There!" Tommy's voice, closer now. "Southeast corner." Bullets sparked off metal around them as Marcus and Diesel sprinted for the loading dock. The roll-up door was down, but Marcus had spotted an access panel earlier. He slid baseball-style toward the wall as more shots chewed up the concrete where he'd been standing. His fingers found the manual release just as boots thundered across the warehouse floor. The door lurched upward with mechanical groaning, revealing the grey dawn outside. Diesel leaped through the gap before it was fully open. Marcus followed, rolling into the parking lot as bullets whined overhead. His Harley sat where he'd left it, 40 yards away, across open ground. "Move!" he shouted. They ran together, man and dog, as the warehouse vomited armed men behind them. Marcus's hands found the ignition, muscle memory taking over as his mind calculated pursuit times and escape routes. The Harley roared to life. Diesel leaped onto his customized platform behind the seat, claws finding purchase on the textured surface. They were moving before Marcus was fully settled, acceleration pressing them both backward as bullets shattered the morning quiet. In his mirrors, Marcus saw Tommy emerge from the warehouse, face twisted with rage. But they were already too far away, disappearing into the maze of industrial streets that would carry them toward whatever came next. The warehouse smelled like rust and betrayal. Marcus kept his hands visible, fingers spread wide as he stepped through the doorway with Diesel pressed against his left leg. The German shepherd's muscles coiled beneath his black and tan coat, ready to explode into motion at the first sign of trouble. "Well, well," Snake's voice echoed from somewhere in the shadows between towering stacks of shipping containers. "The prodigal son returns." Marcus counted at least 6 different boot patterns in the dust on the concrete floor. His eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light filtering through grimy skylights overhead. Diesel's ears swiveled like radar dishes, tracking sounds Marcus couldn't hear. "You wanted to talk, Snake. Here I am." Laughter bounced off the corrugated walls. "Talk? Brother, we're way past talking." Snake emerged from behind a forklift, his leather vest hanging loose over a beer gut that hadn't been there 5 years ago. The club's death's head patch seemed to sneer from his back. "You cost us the Martinez contract. That was $250,000 in product." The Martinez deal was dirty from the start. DEA had their hooks in deep. "Says who?" Snake's hand drifted toward the pistol tucked in his waistband. "Your cop girlfriend?" Marcus felt Diesel tense. The dog had caught something in Snake's tone, some shift in body language that screamed danger. Sarah had nothing to do with this. "Funny thing about cops," Snake continued, circling closer. "They got this way of making people forget where their loyalties lie, making them think they're better than the Brotherhood that raised them." Two more bikers stepped out from behind the containers, Tommy Wrench Morrison and Big Jim Kowalski. Marcus had ridden with both men for years, shared beers and blood, and the kind of bonds that weren't supposed to break. But money changed everything. Fear changed more. "This doesn't have to go sideways," Marcus said, though he was already calculating distances and angles. 15 feet to the nearest cover, 20 to the exit. 6 armed men, maybe more he couldn't see yet. Not good odds, even with Diesel's help. "No, it doesn't." Snake pulled his gun, letting it hang loose at his side. "You just need to remember who you are, what you owe." Diesel's growl started low in his chest, a rumble that promised violence. The dog had been through enough fights to recognize the moment when talk turned to action. His lips pulled back just enough to show the tips of his canines. "Easy, boy," Marcus murmured, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the dog or himself. "Yeah, easy," Snake mocked. "Wouldn't want your mutt to get hurt." He raised the pistol halfway. "Though I gotta say, never thought I'd see Marcus Kane hiding behind a dog." The insult hit its mark, sending heat up Marcus's neck, but he'd learned patience in the 4 years since finding Diesel bleeding in that alley. The dog had taught him that sometimes survival meant waiting for the right moment instead of charging headfirst into danger. "You know what your problem is, Snake? You think loyalty is about blind obedience, following orders even when they lead straight to hell. Loyalty is about family, about the club. The club was supposed to be about brotherhood, protection, not pushing poison to kids and washing money for cartels." Snake's face twisted. "You self-righteous piece of—" Diesel erupted into motion before Snake could finish the sentence. The dog had been watching, waiting, reading the micro-expressions that preceded violence. As Snake's gun hand started to rise, 80 pounds of trained muscle launched across the space between them. Marcus moved in the same instant, diving left toward a stack of pallets as gunfire erupted. Wood splinters exploded around him. Diesel's snarl cut through the chaos, followed by Snake's scream and the metallic clatter of a gun hitting concrete. "Kill them both!" Snake's voice cracked with pain and rage. Marcus rolled behind the pallets as bullets punched through the wood above his head. He could hear Diesel working, the wet sound of teeth finding flesh, the crash of bodies hitting the ground. The dog fought like a demon, but there were too many guns, too many angles. A bullet crease burned across Marcus's shoulder as he broke cover, heading for better protection behind an overturned forklift. He could see Diesel now, blood on his muzzle, standing over Snake's writhing form. But Big Jim was bringing his shotgun around, the barrel tracking toward the dog. Time stretched like taffy. Marcus saw the finger tightening on the trigger, saw Diesel turning toward the new threat, but not fast enough. 4 years of shared meals, shared dangers, shared quiet moments when the dog's presence was the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. Marcus threw himself between the shotgun and his partner, feeling the first pellets tear into his chest, even as his own hands closed around the weapon's barrel. Behind him, Diesel's bark turned savage, protective, desperate. The warehouse spun sideways. Blood filled his mouth. But the dog was alive, and somehow that felt like winning. The warehouse smelled of rust and desperation. Marcus kept his hands visible as Vega's men herded him deeper into the cavernous space, their footsteps echoing off concrete walls. Steel beams stretched overhead like the ribs of some massive beast, and fluorescent lights buzzed intermittently, casting sickly shadows across stacks of wooden crates. "You know, I always wondered what kind of man picks up a dying mutt from the gutter," Vega said, emerging from behind a pillar. His expensive suit looked out of place in the industrial setting, but his smile was perfectly at home, cold and predatory. Now I think I understand. Takes one piece of trash to recognize another. Marcus said nothing. His eyes swept the warehouse, counting exits, gauging distances. 3 men flanked him, 2 more by the main entrance. Vega stood 20 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to run if things went sideways. "Where's my product, Marcus?" "What product?" Marcus kept his voice level. "Last I checked, I wasn't in your supply chain." Vega's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Cute. My shipment went missing 2 nights ago. 40 kilos of premium Colombian. Word is your club hit my trucks. Then your word's wrong." The blow came without warning, a rifle butt to his kidney that dropped Marcus to one knee. He gritted his teeth against the pain, refusing to give Vega the satisfaction of hearing him cry out. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Vega said, crouching down until they were eye level. "Where is my product?" Marcus met his gaze steadily. "Go to hell." The footage showed the exterior of Marcus's garage. Tank was tied to a post near the building's side entrance, pacing restlessly within the confines of his chain. The timestamp read 30 minutes ago. "Beautiful animal," Vega continued. "Shame he's going to die for your stubbornness." Something cold settled in Marcus's chest. "Leave him out of this. That's not how this works. You cost me money, I cost you something precious. It's basic economics." Vega pocketed the phone. "Of course, we could avoid all this unpleasantness. Tell me where my product is, and maybe I'll let you both live." Marcus forced himself to think through the rage building behind his eyes. The Angels hadn't hit any shipments, which meant someone else had, and they were using his club as a scapegoat. But proving that would take time he didn't have. "Even if I knew where your drugs were," Marcus said slowly, "what makes you think I'd trade them for empty promises?" "Because I'm a reasonable man." Vega gestured to one of his men, who produced a tablet. The screen showed a live feed from the garage. Tank had stopped pacing and was looking directly at the camera, as if he sensed he was being watched. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to make some calls, track down my property, and arrange for its return. You have 2 hours. And if I can't? Then my men are going to shoot your dog, slowly, while you watch." Vega's smile never wavered. "After that, we'll discuss what other pets of yours need putting down. I believe you have several club brothers who might qualify." The warehouse fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Marcus studied the faces around him. Hard men who killed for money, not passion. They'd follow Vega's orders without hesitation or remorse. "Untie me," Marcus said finally. "I don't think so. You'll make your calls from right here, with my full assistance." Vega nodded to another man who brought over a phone. "Start with your president. I'm sure he'll be very interested to learn about your situation." Marcus accepted the phone but didn't dial. His mind raced through possibilities, scenarios, desperate gambles. Every option led to the same conclusion. Tank was going to die unless Marcus found a miracle. "Clock's ticking," Vega said. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming text. Vega glanced at the screen and frowned. "Unknown number. Answer it." Marcus swiped to read the message, and his blood turned to ice water. "Got your scent. Coming." The text was followed by a photo that made no sense. Tank's collar and chain, but no Tank. Just an empty post and scattered links of broken metal. "What is it?" Vega demanded. But Marcus was already looking up at the warehouse's high windows. Something was moving in the shadows between the steel beams. Something that had learned to hunt in silence, to track by scent alone, and to protect what it loved with absolute, unquestioning loyalty. The fluorescent lights began going out one by one, plunging sections of the warehouse into darkness. The warehouse echoed with the sound of Rico's labored breathing as he pressed himself against a concrete pillar, blood seeping through his leather jacket from the graze across his shoulder. Diesel lay motionless 20 feet away, and the sight made Rico's chest tighten with a grief so raw it threatened to consume him. 4 years of unconditional loyalty, and now his best friend was gone because of his mistakes. "Come on out, Rico!" Marcus's voice bounced off the metal walls, accompanied by the deliberate scrape of boots on concrete. "Let's finish this like men. Your mutt can't save you now." Rico checked his 45, 2 rounds left. Marcus had at least 3 guys with him, maybe more. The math wasn't promising, but Rico had faced worse odds. What ate at him wasn't the possibility of dying. It was the certainty that Diesel had died thinking he'd failed to protect the one person who'd ever shown him real love. A metallic clang echoed from the far side of the warehouse. Marcus's men were spreading out, trying to flank him. Rico wiped blood from his eyes and calculated distances. The exit was 40 yards through open ground. He'd never make it. "You know what's funny?" Marcus called out, his voice closer now. "I always wondered what would break the great Rico Vasquez. Turns out, it was just a damn dog." Rico's jaw clenched. He shifted position, trying to get a visual on Marcus's location. A shadow moved between the shipping containers stacked near the loading dock. Rico raised his weapon, finger hovering over the trigger. Then he heard it, a low, almost inaudible whimper. Rico's head snapped toward the sound. Diesel lay exactly where he'd fallen, but something was different. The dog's chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular breaths. Alive. Barely, but alive. Relief flooded through Rico, followed immediately by renewed desperation. Diesel needed a vet, needed help now, but getting to him meant crossing open ground under the guns of 4 men who wanted Rico dead. "I see you looking at your precious pet," Marcus taunted. "Don't worry, I'll put it out of its misery after I'm done with you." The threat ignited something primal in Rico's chest. He'd lost everything else, his club, his brothers, his reputation. But he'd be damned if he'd lose Diesel too. Rico broke from cover, sprinting in a zigzag pattern toward his fallen companion. Gunfire erupted immediately, muzzle flashes lighting up the warehouse like deadly fireworks. Bullets whined past his head and sparked off concrete as he dove and rolled behind an overturned table. "Kill him!" Marcus screamed. Rico popped up long enough to squeeze off a shot that sent one of the gunmen diving for cover, then moved again. Diesel was only 10 feet away now, close enough that Rico could see the dog's eyes tracking his movement. Still fighting, still aware. Another sprint brought Rico to Diesel's side. The dog had taken a bullet in the flank, the wound serious but not immediately fatal if Rico could get him help. Diesel's tail gave the faintest wag when Rico's hand touched his head. "I got you, boy," Rico whispered. "We're getting out of here." He holstered his weapon and gathered Diesel carefully in his arms. The dog was dead weight, 60 pounds of muscle and bone, but Rico had carried wounded brothers before. He could do this. "Touching," Marcus said, stepping into view 30 feet away with his pistol trained on Rico. "Real touching. But the dog dies first. I want you to watch." Marcus shifted his aim toward Diesel, and Rico saw his own death in the man's eyes. Not just his death, but Diesel's too. Marcus would make him watch, would draw it out, would... Diesel's eyes opened wider, fixing on Marcus with an intensity Rico recognized. Even wounded, even dying, the dog was reading the threat. Rico felt Diesel's muscles tense in his arms. "Goodbye, mutt," Marcus said, finger tightening on the trigger. Diesel launched himself from Rico's arms with the last of his strength, 60 pounds of fury and loyalty sailing through the air toward Marcus. The man's shot went wide as he stumbled backward, and Rico's final bullet took Marcus center mass before he could recover. The warehouse fell silent except for the ringing in Rico's ears. Marcus lay sprawled on the concrete, his reign of terror finally ended. The other gunmen had vanished into the shadows, probably running now that their leader was dead. Rico dropped to his knees beside Diesel, who had collapsed again but was still breathing. The dog's eyes found his, and Rico saw something there he'd never seen before: peace. As if Diesel knew he'd done his job, had protected his human one last time. "Stay with me," Rico whispered, gathering Diesel gently and heading for the exit. "Just stay with me, boy. We're going home." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Rico didn't care anymore about running or hiding. All that mattered was getting Diesel the help he needed and keeping the promise he'd made 4 years ago to a dying puppy in an alley. The warehouse smelled of rust and motor oil, a familiar scent that should have been comforting but now felt suffocating. Jake's wrists burned against the zip ties binding him to the metal chair, and the taste of copper filled his mouth from where Razor's fist had connected with his lip. Across the concrete floor, Rex lay motionless in a spreading pool of crimson, his breathing so shallow it was barely visible. "4 years I've been planning this," Razor said, circling Jake like a predator. His boots echoed in the cavernous space. "4 years since you cost me everything." Jake kept his eyes on Rex, willing the dog to stay down, to stay quiet. Blood matted the shepherd's golden fur where the bullet had grazed his shoulder, but Jake could see the slight rise and fall of his ribs. Still alive, still fighting. "You remember Phoenix, don't you?" Razor's voice carried a manic edge. "That warehouse job you sabotaged?" The memory hit Jake like a sledgehammer. Phoenix, 2019. He'd gotten word that Razor was planning to move heroin through elementary school zones, using kids as runners. Jake had fed information to the DEA, watched from across the street as federal agents swarmed the operation. He'd thought he was saving those kids. He never imagined the war it would start. "Cost me $2 million and my reputation," Razor continued. "But worse than that, it cost me my brother." Jake's blood went cold. Tommy. Razor's little brother had been caught in the raid, tried to run, and took 3 bullets in the back from a trigger-happy rookie agent. Jake had read about it in the papers, felt sick for weeks afterward. He'd never meant for anyone to die. Tommy was clean. Razor's voice cracked with rage. "Just helping me move some boxes. Didn't even know what was in them. But he died because of your betrayal." Razor eye. The backhand came fast, snapping Jake's head to the side. Stars exploded across his vision. "Don't you dare speak his name." Razor pulled out a chrome. .45, the same gun that had dropped Rex. "I've spent 4 years tracking you down. 4 years planning exactly how I'm going to make you pay." Jake tested the zip ties again, feeling them bite deeper into his skin. The chair was bolted to the floor, no chance of tipping it over. His Harley keys were somewhere on the floor with his wallet and phone, scattered when Razor's crew had jumped him outside the diner. He'd been careless, distracted by thoughts of Sarah and the life he was trying to build. "Here's what's going to happen," Razor said, pressing the gun barrel against Jake's temple. The metal was still warm from the last shot. "I'm going to put a bullet in your brain, just like Tommy got. But first, I want you to watch your precious mutt bleed out. Want you to know that everything you love dies because of your choices." Rex's ear twitched at the sound of Razor's voice. Jake saw it, a tiny movement that filled him with desperate hope. The dog was listening, waiting. Even wounded, even bleeding, Rex was still ready to fight. "You always were too soft," Razor continued. "Picking up strays, playing hero. That's why you never fit with the club. Real brothers don't rat each other out. Real brothers don't sell poison to kids," Jake shot back. This time the gun butt caught him across the cheekbone. Pain exploded through his skull and warm blood trickled down his face. But the blow had shifted his position slightly and he felt something in his back pocket, the small tactical knife he always carried. If he could work his bound hands down far enough. "You destroyed my family," Razor hissed. "Now I'm going to destroy yours." He turned the gun toward Rex, and Jake's heart stopped. The dog lifted his head slightly, brown eyes meeting Jake's across the warehouse floor. In that gaze, Jake saw everything. 4 years of loyalty, of shared rides and quiet nights, of unconditional love from a creature who'd asked for nothing but food and shelter and had given back everything. "Don't," Jake whispered. "Please, kill me, but leave him alone." Razor smiled, a cold expression that held no mercy. "That's not how this works." The sound of Rex's low growl filled the warehouse, and Jake realized the dog was no longer playing dead. Rex's muscles coiled beneath his bloodied fur, and despite the wound, despite the pain, the shepherd began to rise. "Stay down," Jake breathed, but Rex was already moving. The dog launched himself at Razor with a snarl that came from somewhere primal and fierce. Razor spun, finger tightening on the trigger, but Rex was faster than his wounded state should have allowed. 80 pounds of loyal fury crashed into the biker, sending them both sprawling across the concrete floor. The gun skittered away into the shadows as man and dog fought for survival. The warehouse reeked of motor oil and betrayal. Jake's hands were zip-tied behind the rusted chair, blood from his split lip mixing with the taste of fear in his mouth. Across the concrete floor, Diesel lay motionless in a spreading pool of crimson, his breathing shallow and labored. The sight of his loyal companion's still form sent rage coursing through Jake's veins like liquid fire. "You always were too soft, Reaper," Tommy Viper Castellano sneered, circling Jake like a predator savoring its kill. The president's patch on his leather vest caught the harsh fluorescent light. "4 years I've watched you coddle that mutt, made you weak." Jake tested the restraints, feeling the plastic bite into his wrists. "Weak enough to figure out you've been skimming club money? Weak enough to find your little side deals with the serpents?" Viper's backhand cracked across Jake's cheek, stars exploding behind his eyes. "You should have kept your nose out of club business. Now you're gonna disappear, just like the evidence." 3 other angels stood guard around the warehouse. Brick, Hammer, and Razor, men Jake had once called brothers. Their faces showed varying degrees of discomfort, but none moved to help. Fear of Viper's wrath had poisoned the Brotherhood Jake had bled for. "The others know," Jake said, spitting blood. "Snake's already talked to the national chapter." "Snake won't be talking to anyone." Viper pulled out his .45, checking the chamber with deliberate calm. Funny thing about motorcycle accidents, they happen so suddenly. Jake's heart clenched. Snake had been his road captain, his closest friend after Diesel. Now both were paying the price for Jake's investigation into the club's finances. He thought of the evidence hidden in his apartment. Bank records, photos, recorded conversations, all useless if he didn't live to present them. Diesel's eyes flickered open, meeting Jake's gaze across the warehouse floor. The dog's breathing was ragged, but Jake caught the subtle movement of his tail. Still alive, still fighting. "You know what I don't understand?" Viper continued, pressing the gun barrel against Jake's temple. The metal was cold as winter steel. "Why you'd risk everything for a damn dog. It's pathetic." "You wouldn't understand loyalty if it bit you in the ass," Jake growled. "That dog's got more honor than you ever will." Viper laughed, a sound like grinding gears. "Honor? I'm about to put you both out of your misery. Where's the honor in being dead?" Jake closed his eyes, memories flooding back. Finding Diesel as a starving puppy in that alley, nursing him back to health. Years of riding together, the dog's ears flapping in the wind as they conquered endless highways. Diesel sleeping at the foot of his bed, standing guard during club meetings, always watching Jake's back. "Any last words, Reaper?" Jake opened his eyes, staring down the barrel. "Yeah, you forgot one thing." "What's that?" "You didn't kill my dog." A brown blur exploded across the warehouse floor. Diesel launched himself at Viper with the fury of a wounded animal protecting its pack. 60 pounds of loyalty and muscle struck the club president in the chest, sending them both crashing into a stack of oil drums. The gun went off, the bullet ricocheting harmlessly off concrete. Viper screamed as Diesel's teeth found his gun hand, clamping down with the force of a steel trap. The .45 clattered across the floor, Blood sprayed as the dog worried the wound, like he was killing a snake. "Get him off! Get him off!" Viper shrieked. Brick and Hammer rushed forward, but Jake was already moving. He threw himself sideways, toppling the chair and smashing it against the concrete. The impact jarred the zip ties loose enough for him to slip one hand free. Razor raised his shotgun, but Jake rolled behind a workbench as buckshot peppered the warehouse wall. He spotted a tire iron and grabbed it, coming up swinging. The tool caught Razor in the solar plexus, doubling him over. Hammer had his boot raised to kick Diesel, but Jake tackled him from behind. They went down hard, wrestling for the man's knife. Steel flashed in the fluorescent light as they rolled across the oil-stained floor. Diesel released Viper's mangled hand and backed away, hackles raised, blood matting his fur. The club president clutched his wounded arm, his face pale with shock and pain. Jake drove his knee into Hammer's ribs and wrenched the knife away. He rolled to his feet, brandishing the blade as Brick advanced with a crowbar. "It's over, Viper," Jake panted. "Nationals already got the evidence. Your little empire's finished." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Viper's eyes widened with panic as he realized the trap was closing. Snake hadn't died in any accident. He'd brought the cavalry. Diesel limped to Jake's side, and Jake dropped one hand to the dog's head. Still breathing, still loyal, still his brother in all the ways that mattered. The warehouse doors burst open as federal agents flooded in, their voices echoing off the concrete walls. The warehouse fell silent except for the sound of Jake's labored breathing and the soft whimper coming from Diesel's throat. Blood pooled beneath the German shepherd's massive frame, his amber eyes fixed on Jake with the same unwavering devotion they'd held since that first night 4 years ago, when Jake had found him dying in an alley. Marcus lowered his gun, his face pale as he stared at what he'd done. The other serpents shifted nervously, suddenly uncertain about their leader's next move. Nobody had expected the dog to move that fast, to throw himself between the bullet and Jake's chest with such precision that it seemed almost supernatural. "You stupid mutt," Jake whispered, dropping to his knees beside Diesel. His hands trembled as he pressed them against the wound, feeling warm blood seep between his fingers. "You stupid, loyal mutt." Diesel's tail thumped weakly against the concrete floor, and somehow the dog managed to lift his head just enough to lick Jake's wrist. The gesture broke something inside Jake's chest, something that had been holding back 4 years of suppressed emotion. "Call a vet," Jake said without looking up. Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. "For a dog? Jake, we got business to finish here." Jake's head snapped up, and Marcus took an involuntary step backward. There was something in the biker's eyes that went beyond anger, beyond rage. It was the look of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. "I said, call a fucking vet." The warehouse doors burst open before Marcus could respond. Tommy and 3 other Hell's Angels roared in on their bikes, engines echoing off the metal walls like thunder. They'd followed the GPS tracker Jake had hidden in his boot, just as he'd hoped they would when he'd walked into this obvious trap. Gunfire erupted as the serpents scrambled for cover behind shipping containers. Jake threw himself over Diesel's body, shielding the wounded dog as bullets whined overhead. Tommy's voice boomed over the chaos, coordinating the attack with military precision. The firefight lasted less than 3 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 2 serpents were down, and the others had their hands raised in surrender. Marcus crouched behind an overturned table, his gun trained on Jake and Diesel. "Stay back," Marcus shouted. "I'll finish what I started." But he'd made a crucial mistake. In focusing on Jake, he'd lost track of Diesel. Despite his wound, despite the blood loss, the German shepherd had quietly repositioned himself. With a growl that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself, Diesel launched himself at Marcus. The impact sent Marcus sprawling, his gun skittering across the floor. Diesel's jaws clamped down on the man's arm with the force of a steel trap, and Marcus's screams filled the warehouse. Jake whistled once, sharp and short, and Diesel immediately released his grip, limping back to his master's side. Marcus clutched his mangled arm, whimpering. "That thing's a monster." "No," Jake said, gathering Diesel into his arms. "He's family." Tommy had already called his contact at the emergency veterinary clinic. They met Dr. Sarah Chen at her office 20 minutes later, Jake refusing to let anyone else carry Diesel from the bike. The bullet had missed the major organs but nicked an artery. It would be touch and go. Jake sat in the waiting room for 6 hours, still wearing his blood-stained leather jacket, still feeling the phantom weight of Diesel's body in his arms. Tommy brought coffee and stayed silent, understanding that words were inadequate for what his friend was going through. When Dr. Chen finally emerged, her scrubs were bloody, but her expression was cautiously optimistic. "He's going to make it. Strong dog, the strongest I've ever seen." Jake's knees nearly buckled with relief. 3 days later, Jake sat beside Diesel's recovery kennel, watching his partner sleep off the medication. The dog's breathing was steady now, strong. Bandages wrapped his torso, but his tail had wagged when he'd seen Jake that morning. "You know," Dr. Chen said, checking Diesel's chart, "in all my years of practice, I've never seen a bond like yours. That dog didn't just take a bullet for you. He calculated the trajectory, timed his jump perfectly. It's like he understood exactly what was happening." Jake scratched behind Diesel's ears, careful not to disturb the IV line. "He's always been smarter than me." As if hearing his voice, Diesel's eyes fluttered open. Those amber eyes, still sharp despite the pain medication, found Jake's face immediately. The dog's tail managed a weak wag. "Hey there, partner," Jake whispered. "Ready to go home?" Diesel's response was a soft woof of agreement. And Jake knew that whatever came next, whatever challenges the future might hold, they'd face them together, the way they always had, the way they always would.